Wagner is preparing to victoriously retreat from Bakhmut. Because according to its leader Yevgeny Prigozhin, the forces are at complete stalemate inside the city, while at the same time Ukrainians are expecting a lot of Western military vehicles and are highly determined to attack and retake Bakhmut. And it all basically means that Prigozhin is not willing to sacrifice any more of his men, and he thinks that he can use them better somewhere else, maybe in his fight for power. But more about all of this in just a couple of minutes. What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. And let's go straight to the point and see some most recent footage. And as always, we begin with some more cringe material. And they have the representative of the Russian government, Irina Yarovaya, who said that that's it. Now it is confirmed that America was always considering Ukraine as its country to fight against Russia, and also as a country where Americans will be testing their bio-laboratories. This woman proceeds by saying even more nonsense, that now Russia has undeniable proof about the existence of these biolaboratories, and that Ukrainian soldiers, most of the time against their own will, were injected with some American drugs, which increases their rage and hatred specifically towards Russians. I don't know how it is specifically against one nationality, but this is what she said. And while I'm not 100% certain about the existence of these so-called biolaboratories, then I'm pretty positive that Russian authorities, at least some of them, they have to take drugs in order to make these conclusions. But okay, next we have the statement from another Russian politician, Dmitry Medvedev, and he's saying that our goals of our peaceful special military operation remain pretty much the same, which is to remove every single foreigner from Ukraine, to demilitarize this country, to denazify it, and if needed, Russia will go all the way until Kiev and all the way until Lviv. But yes, this is just a peaceful special military operation. But in case needed, we will also be ready to use nuclear weapons in case Ukrainians would want to take Crimea back. But yes, this is just a peaceful special military operation. But okay, because next in less hateful video we have right now is the Minister of Defense of Russia, Sergei Shoigu, awarding medals of honor to Russian soldiers who just intercepted Ukrainian drones in Crimea. And I mean, at this point the Russian authorities, they're ready to give awards for pretty much anything. Oh, so you said you support Russia, here is your medal. Oh, you said that Ukrainians are bad, here is your medal. Which only confirms the fact of the lack of any significant progress and actual achievements on the battlefields. That is why they have to come up with such nonsense as this. Alright, next we have a video from Aramil, close to Yekaterinburg city located in Russia. And as you can see, yet another research and production facility was caught on fire. And while this might not sound like a big deal, in fact, Russians are in critical need of the highly technological equipment and electronics. And this is just one of the reasons why they started bringing these 80-plus-year-old tanks to the front lines recently, because they simply cannot produce any more newer models. Because some parts, especially the electronics, was usually brought from abroad, and now since Russia is the most sanctioned country, they are no longer able to receive them. And as a result, it stops the entire assembly lines across Russia, such as, for example, as you can see right here in Ural Vagon Zavod. They pretty much assemble the entire tank, the exterior, the interior, but just because of the lack of the electrical equipment, they just become these pointless and useless machines. And one of the things, for example, they cannot reproduce are the GPS systems, as you can see right here. And yes, I do know that they look extremely old, but Russians claim that they got used to using them so much, they just don't want to train on anything much newer. And it's not just the tanks, it is also about the armored personnel carriers and many other military combat vehicles. But, I mean, it still did not stop the Russian propagandists, such as, for example, everyone's famous and most likely not favorite Vladimir Solovyov, who is saying, I mean, that the entire division of older Russian tanks will still be extremely competitive. But then right here we have this small video which compares one of these T-55 Russian tanks against, for example, Challenger 2. And as you can see, the size difference is pretty sizable. And pretty much yes, if you also think that these 80-year-old tanks are in some kind of disadvantage to their modern competitors, let's just all together like this video and subscribe to my channel to see how many of us are right here. You can also follow my second channel, The Russian Dude Clips, where I post every single day under 1-minute summaries. The link will be down below. Alright, just literally a couple more words about the Western support to Ukraine, and then we can talk about the situation in the south and east of Ukraine. And so, first of all, according to the representative of Ukrainian Air Force, Yuri Ignat, he's saying that maybe some Western countries are considering sending their fighter jets along with their own pilots, the ones who are willing to fight in Ukraine. And the reason for this is to dramatically accelerate the supplies of the Western fighter jets to Ukraine, because at this point Ukrainian pilots will not need to train for several months how to use these planes. And ultimately, we have the statement from NATO, which wants to do its military training right next to the borders with Russia, next to Kaliningrad region, and they are planning to bring 2,500 soldiers and 500 pieces of the equipment. So much for not letting NATO expand, Mr. Putin. Alright, and now as promised, let's talk about the situation in the south and the east of Ukraine, and we begin with south, specifically Crimean Peninsula. And first of all, recently a reconnaissance plane Boeing along with 2 fighter jets was circulating very close to Crimean Peninsula, collecting the intelligence data. But this time it was not just the weaponless drone, it was actually the aerial vehicles which will be able to resist the Russian aggression. That is why Russians did nothing. Next we have the statement by the representative of Defense Intelligence of Ukraine, Andrei Yusov, who is saying that at this very moment the residents of Crimean Peninsula are receiving the messages that they should consider leaving Crimea. And at the same time, according to him, the Russian authorities, collaborators and infiltrators on this peninsula, they are also starting to sell their properties as fast as possible, most likely preparing to flee as well. Next we go closer to Kherson region, and according to the Institute for the Study of War report, Ukrainians intensified their raids across the Dnipro River. And as a result of these assaults, Ukrainians were able to destroy a Russian Tor missile system next to Hola Pristan and also a fuel depot next to Nova Zubrivka. And then right here we have a video which has been recently released by Valery Zaluzhny, which shows how Ukrainians were destroying massive Russian military ships located in Berdyansk port, almost in the very beginning of this war. I'm not sure if I can show the entire video if I want to be in compliance with YouTube guidelines, but if you want to see the full version with sounds, I upload it on my Patreon, where still 1 week of free access, and the link will be down below. Alright, and now let's get closer to the east, and then as you can see from this unusual video, Ukrainian drones were able to find this lake or pond where there was a lot of fish. And the reason for this, it is because this pond is located in a very hot area, which means that for the last several years the locals were not doing fishing there at all, which allowed the fish to multiply itself to these numbers. Next we once again have the same report by the Institute for the Study of War, which claims that Russians attempted assaults along Kupiansk-Svatove-Kreminna front line, but neither of those attacks were successful. But on the other hand, Ukrainian artillery was able to destroy a Russian electronic warfare system to the north of Svatove. And as we go a little bit more to the south, we can see that Russians were able to advance a little bit closer to Belohirivka. Our next stop brings us closer to Bakhmut, specifically to the southwestern part of it, where Russians once again attempted to assault Ivanovsky from the south, but this group concentration of Russians has been successfully destroyed by Ukrainians. And to be honest, that's pretty much everything I can say about the attempts of Russians to advance recently, not just last day alone, but pretty much the entire week. And as you can see, they're not able to assault anywhere anymore. In one of my previous videos I also mentioned that Russians will be now switching from targeting the civilian and energy infrastructure of Ukraine mainly to targeting only military objects. Which, to be honest, if you think about it, means that Russians are also getting critically low on their missiles, and they're no longer able to use them to scare Ukrainians, which they always fail to do, but now they have to be very selective with their targets. But wait, there is more, because the situation of Russians is actually even worse. Not too many people talk about it, but if you realize it, you'll be just like, wow, this is absolutely insane. And what I'm talking about? That Wagner soldiers are contract soldiers, right? And to be honest, a lot of their contracts were 6 months long. And yes, that's right, we are right now in the period when the majority of Wagner contracts start to expire. The recruitment of the biggest portion of Wagner soldiers started approximately in September-October, along at the same time with this so-called partial mobilization in Russia. And now let's count together. So, if the majority of them sign up in September, so what it means? October, November, December, January, February and March. That's right now we are in March, which basically means majority of these 6 months contracts are close to be expired. But you will just not believe, but it still can get even worse. Because whenever Russians were relatively successful in the east, approximately in February, Prigozhin started to accumulate some kind of political power, which obviously Putin and the Ministry of Defense of Russia did not like. And guess what happened? In February, they prohibited Wagner to recruit more prisoners. But besides that, all of us know that the heaviest casualties among Russian forces were suffered specifically inside Wagner units, which basically means those survivors who came back to home, they started telling these stories that were just sent forward without any support at all, being the easy target for Ukrainians, pretty much demoralizing and demotivating anyone who would want to join the Russian army and specifically Wagner forces. In addition to that, not just Wagner soldiers, but regular Russian common army, these soldiers they started complaining long time ago that they stopped receiving their salary. So it's pretty much yes, almost no one would willingly go to war unless there is some kind of a reward for them, especially if you are the invader country. And as of recently, it has been confirmed that soldiers from at least 52 regions in Russia have been their salaries delayed or not paid at all. So guess what? As soon as their contracts will expire, I don't think that their retention will be pretty high. And so, back to Yevgeny Prigozhin and Wagner. He perfectly understands this, along with other problems that Wagner is constantly facing, so it looks like that he might prefer to save at least some of his soldiers who are left and maybe use them somewhere else profitable, I guess let's call it like this, probably in the places such as Africa. And just in general, the narrative of Yevgeny Prigozhin towards the Russian authorities, and specifically the Ministry of Defense of Russia, kinda softened recently. If you remember, in the past he was always in contradiction with them, he was always arguing with them. You're not giving us ammunition, forces, reinforcements, you don't give us supplies or anything like this. But recently he became like, just whatever, I don't care. He also stopped being scared, I guess, making the statements which are in direct contradiction with Putin's statement. Such as, for example, Yevgeny Prigozhin is acknowledging that Russia is fighting against Ukraine, not NATO, and that it is very questionable that Ukraine has Nazis, which is pretty much the entire narrative of Putin. In addition to that, Senior Prigozhin also mentions that Ukrainians, according to his intelligence, first of all let me mention this, that Ukrainians assembled approximately 200,000 soldiers to retake the east, and one of the first cities they'll be focusing on will be exactly Bakhmut. And in addition to that, Ukrainians will be obviously using a lot of more modern NATO equipment and military vehicles, which they're receiving right as we speak. And you know what? All of this, it does look like that Yevgeny Prigozhin is preparing the stage in informational space and in media for the potential victorious retreat of Wagner from Bakhmut. I mean, he just no longer sees even the point in continuing to do it, because Putin and the Ministry of Defense of Russia never truly appreciated his effort and gave him extra political points, which he was hoping so much for. In fact, it was quite the opposite. As soon as Wagner and specifically Prigozhin started to become more politically influential, the Russian authorities made sure for him to know his place. And Prigozhin knows that the liberating counteroffensive of Ukrainians is coming. And because of this, I don't think that he is willing to sacrifice any more of his men. I don't think that he unfortunately cares about them that much, but still, he will want to prefer to use them somewhere else, maybe in the potential fight for power in the future. And just as always, if you don't want to miss any of these events as soon as they start happening, just please consider subscribing to my channel. It only takes one click. And if you want to support my work financially, please consider becoming my channel member, use the PayPal link or become my Patreon, where is still 1 week of free access. You can find all the others linked to the right and down below. Thank you so much for your attention, товарищи, and see you on Tuesday.